I can't see because of the sun, but this is behind the altar where the Pope will be celebrating Mass tomorrow for the canonization. And this is what he'll be looking out and seeing, only it'll be full of people. This entire place. I'm not going to be there because Pamela won't be able to handle this, but Mr. Steve and Miss Janet will be here tomorrow morning. Up here are the saints. Well, no, not saints yet. These are people to be canonized. Archbishop Romero. I don't know who the other ones are, but normally these banners are not up here, and it's only because this is a special weekend where they will celebrate the canonization of like 7 saints to be. This is the dome designed by Michelangelo at St. Peter's Basilica. Here is a wonderful view of it with no people. Reporting to you from the Vatican, the dome designed by Michelangelo himself. You may be wondering why I didn't show any pictures of the Sistine Chapel. That's against the rules. There are guards there who watch to make sure that nobody is taking pictures and that nobody is talking. Although it was so crowded yesterday, because I'm recording this after the fact, but it was so crowded yesterday that people were talking, and every once in a while the Italians would shout out, "No talking, no photos, no talking." So it's kind of funny. Anyway, so what the guides do is on the outside you can see these signs, and they will explain everything about the Sistine Chapel before you get there. This is our guide, Alberto, and he was our guide for the entire time in Rome. And you see the flag he's holding? All the guides hold these sticks with something that stands out, and he chose a flag. And that way you can find your guide, because as you're walking around Rome, you just see lots of groups and lots of guides, and it would be really easy to get lost. And then the short lady with the red hat, she's our caboose. She always is at the back of the crowd to make sure we didn't lose anybody, because it's really easy to get lost in Rome. The guide told us a lot of interesting things about the Sistine Chapel. Originally, it had a blue ceiling with gold stars, and that was a common thing to do in the Middle Ages. And it was only supposed to be for the popes and the cardinals to see. Your average public, you and I, we would not have ever gotten a chance to be in the Sistine Chapel. And it was in 1933 that ordinary folks could go visit. One of the things he did, because he wanted to make a point to the leadership that, hey, you are equal to everybody else. And so he painted everybody nude. Now, when you see it today, they're not all nude, only a couple figures. And that's because they did not like that idea, so somebody painted clothing on all the people in the Sistine Chapel. Another interesting thing that we learned was about the restoration of the paintings. They didn't have to restore it because it was flaking off, but you can see in the little picture above the man's hat that on the left side of that picture it's kind of dark and the colors are muted, and then on the right side you see the colors bright. And they figured out that was caused by years and years of candle wax and smoke being evaporated into the air, and that was clinging onto the picture. And somebody figured out that you could use a mixture of 3 parts water and 1 part ammonia, and if you cleaned them below, you would see the beautiful pictures. It took 15 years to clean all that. So from 1982 to 1987, or 97, from 1982 to 1997, that's what they were busy doing. The Sistine Chapel was built to have the exact dimensions of the Temple of Solomon. They actually looked it up in the Bible, and they made that chapel the same size. what's interesting is when you look at the ceiling is focused on the Old Testament, so it really ties the Christian faith to the Jewish faith. And Michelangelo picked out all the important scenes of the Old Testament, showing basically the creation and the fall, and then continued fall, the Tower of Babel, and Noah, and it even shows the very last scene where Noah cultivates grapes and makes wine, and next thing you know, he had a little too much wine to drink. And from what the man was telling us, you can see the panels here that I'm zooming in on. That's what's on the ceiling. And not only do you have in the middle those scenes from the Bible, on the exterior you have the great prophets. So there's one of Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, and Zechariah and Jonah. All of the major and minor prophets are depicted in those little triangles, as well as pagan oracles. Like there's one of the Oracle of Delphi and different sibyls. So he was also tying it into pagan beliefs, not only the Jewish faith, but pagan beliefs. And if you think about it, that kind of points to who were the original Gentiles. They were Greeks, and what did they believe? They believed the Oracle of Delphi. They believed in the pagan gods. And so this is very much a classical way of showing the faith that happened before Christ. What we see here are drawings from Michelangelo's notebooks, and it shows the scaffolding that he put in place so that he could paint the Sistine Chapel. People tend to think he did it lying down, but you can see from his illustration that he was standing up. And in fact, he did get some eye damage from this project because the paint that would drip in his eyes as he was working. Now you can see here, as I talked about earlier, the difference that the cleaning process made in the illustrations. They're much more vibrant, and you can see the colors, and it doesn't look like everything's under a veil or in a shadow. And then the next thing I wanted you to see is what I had talked about. On the right is the Oracle of Delphi, one of the sibyls, who would speak wise things to people, and they would go to them for advice. And then on the left you see Jeremiah, the weeping prophet from the Old Testament. And then at the very top, now this was something interesting I had never heard of, but apparently in 1990, a surgeon noticed, if you looked at the creation of man, when God is bringing man to life, look at the shape in which God is placed. It is the shape of the brain. And after much debate and discussion, people tend to think now that Michelangelo may have been talking about intelligence as being one of the gifts, the special gifts that God gave to man. And we know that he had dissected bodies in order to understand the anatomy of the human body. So that's not exactly far-fetched for him to know the shape of the brain. What Michelangelo wanted people to see when they first walked in was the judgment. And so a lot of the picture you see shows the good people, the people who are going to heaven, the people who had faith in Christ. And then at the bottom of the picture, you have the people who were not going to heaven. And what's a couple of interesting things, I already talked about the clothing. If you look at the people going up to heaven, they aren't smiling yet because they don't quite know their situation. So this is at that first moment of people starting to realize what is happening to them. An interesting thing is if you look below Christ, there is the skin that's just hanging off of one of the figures, and that is representing Michelangelo himself, that he gave his whole body, his whole skin into this project because it really did take up a lot of his life. And like I said, it did affect his eyesight. And he also he didn't get along with some of the cardinals, and so guess where he put them? There's actually two prominent people whose faces were recognizable One being a serpent had wrapped itself around the man's body. So yeah, artists back then got back at people as well. After the Sistine Chapel, we went into this museum, the Vatican Museum, and there is just so much to see. There's no way that you could ever see everything. But this tapestry was really interesting to me. There was an entire hall of tapestries. They have the room darkened on purpose to preserve them because light will destroy the colors. This particular one is fascinating because the artist made the focal point Christ's eyes. And so our guide told us, as you walk on the other end of the hall and keep your eyes focused on Christ, and they will follow you because it's the focal point. And sure enough, as you walk across the down the hallway and you stay focused on his eyes, they follow you. And that I just thought was really cool, not just physically, but the meaning of what it means to keep your eyes on Christ.